Welcome everyone to the 6th Annual Equine Industry Symposium. We are so glad you are able to join us tonight to discuss inclusivity in the equine industry. While we are waiting for everyone to get settled and join in, we've created some poll questions to get you thinking about some of the key topics that will be addressed throughout this evening. I also just wanted to give you a quick reminder that this session is being recorded and will be posted later on our BBRM YouTube channel. The poll question should appear on your screen now, and there are 3 questions to be answered. The first question is, have you ever felt excluded from the equine industry? We are now sharing the poll results of the first question. It seems to be a pretty even split. And the second question that should come up on your screen shortly is, do you believe there are a lot of opportunities to get involved in the equine industry? Here are the results for the second question. And the third question that should show up on the screen shortly is, do you feel there are initiatives within the equine industry right now that encourage inclusivity? And there are the results to the third question. Now we will have a quick message from our official media sponsor, KX 94.7.
Hello, I'm Rick Nida from KX 94.7, New Country FM. Welcome to the 2021 University of Guelph's Equine Industry Symposium. KX 94.7 is the proud media sponsor of this year's symposium, and here is a little bit more about us. KX 94.7 is Canada's #1 country radio station, launched in August of 2011 with a 100,000 watt signal. KX 94.7 serves the communities of Hamilton, Guelph, Waterloo, Kitchener, Acton, Fergus, Burlington, Oakville, and the rest of the Golden Horseshoe, from Niagara to the western boundaries of Toronto. Country music has never been so popular, especially within the younger generation. KX 94.7 audience is upscale. 46% live in households of $100,000 plus income. 29% are executives, professionals, or managers, and 61% have a post-secondary education. Canada's Country Music Association's 2014 Personalities of the Year, Toff and Melissa, kick off the morning show from 5:30 to 9. Then it's Linda Martelli till 2 p.m., followed by Durham on the drive home till 7 p.m. Mike Fuller hosts evenings and weekends. Thanks so much for allowing KX 94.7 to be part of this year's event, and please enjoy the symposium. Thanks.
Before we begin, we would like to take a moment to thank the members of the EIS Organizing Committee, chaired by Dr. Katrina Merkes, who supports us as the students putting this event together. Without them, we would not be able to experience what it means to host the Equine Industry Symposium. We would also like to thank KX 94.7, our official media sponsor, Equine Guelph, Ontario Equestrian, and Equestrian Canada for their support. Tonight's session will include presentations from our guest speakers, as well as small group discussions using the Zoom breakout rooms, moderated by a member of our committee. Our conversation on inclusivity stems from yesterday's session, which explored social license to operate and public trust. If you were unable to join us last night, the recording will be posted on the official BBRM YouTube channel for your viewing following the conclusion of the symposium. We have some great speakers joining us tonight who are all very knowledgeable and well-known in the equine industry. We will be hearing from Paralympic dressage coach Simone Williams. We will also have a great presentation from Lorna Cameron and Linda Greening, all the way from Hartpury University in the UK. Lastly, Akaash Maharaj will be our moderator for this evening and will be sharing his extensive knowledge on the equine industry and country demographics with us. Just some netiquette before we begin. Please take a moment to ensure that your microphone is muted. Microphones should remain off for the duration of the presentations. During the breakout rooms, everyone will have the ability to turn on or unmute their microphone, but please be respectful of others in the group and be mindful of delays due to internet connection. There is also a raise hand feature. As you can see, the instructions are posted for you on the screen. You may use this feature during the question and answer periods after each presentation that will be moderated by Akaash. At the end of the evening, we will have a charity poll as well and ask people to pick which charity they would like us to support, and we will compile the results on Wednesday night. So stay tuned to our socials to find out which charity will get the highest donations. You can see the charity options on your screen now. To start off our evening, Akaash will introduce us to demographics within the equine industry in Canada. Drawing from his extensive experience working with the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, the United Nations, and UNICEF, Akaash is an excellent resource for tonight's discussion. We would also like to thank Akaash for his continued support of this event, as he has moderated the symposium every year thus far. I will now hand it over to Akaash, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I should like to add to Emma's expression of thanks to the students, faculty of the University of Guelph, as well as to our speakers and our institutional partners, and in particular, everyone who's made time this evening to be part of this discussion. I should mention that I am speaking from the town of Almont, which is in the Ottawa Valley. It's named in honor actually of an Indigenous man, a Nahuatl statesman, Juan Almonte, but it's the ancestral lands of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat First Nations, and now home to people from around the world. I encourage you, wherever you might be, participating in this forum, to be part of or to reflect on the Indigenous heritage of the land where you are based. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to tonight's discussion of inclusion in the equestrian sector on the second day of the Equine Industry Symposium. Equestrianism is an old passion in Canada and an ancient passion in the broader community of nations. I think that we can be proud of our history of inclusion. And for example, the Calgary Stampede was initiated in part by freed slaves like John Ware, whose stamp appears on the screen in front of you. But institutions and communities can regress as well as progress. And there's no denying that today we've seen a collapse in the participation of racial, social, and other minority groups in the Canadian equestrian sector. And so, of course, I should begin by saying or addressing the question of why this is important. Last night, we had a discussion of social license, and I think it's fair to say that that applies to inclusivity in our sector. I think we're all aware of the fact that we're living through a juncture in history when there has been heightened and passionate awareness of issues of racism, discrimination, and exclusion in society. And it is simply the case that Canadians are unlikely to give their support, either private or public, to a sector unless they believe that sector is reflective of their values. And for all of our imperfections as a country, certainly inclusivity is one of those core values. Secondly, there's the issue of economic recovery. The fact that we are participating in this year's Equine Industry Symposium, like last year's, virtually is, of course, a legacy of the pandemic. The pandemic has hit almost every aspect or every sector of our economy very hard, but it has been particularly crippling in many ways to the equine sector because it has inhibited the ability of Canadians to come together in pursuit of their passion. If the sector is to recover, it's going to have to not simply try to bring back people who had left equestrian sport and equine activities because of the pandemic, but also make up for the inevitable fact that some people who have left during the pandemic are not going to come back. We can only hope to have an economic recovery if we broaden the base of participation in our sector. And equine facilities, be they clubs, riding facilities, or equine professionals such as farriers and trainers, will only be able to continue making a living and supporting our sector if we find ways to increase the number of people and therefore the breadth of people who are part of our sector. There's also a question of deepening the talent pool. I had the great privilege of leading the National Equestrian Federation through its most successful Olympics and Paralympics of all time, a time when the Federation had its best financial results and its best public and private revenue. It's no coincidence that that also overlapped the time when the Federation had its largest and in modern times most diverse membership, because the Federation was therefore able to draw upon a broader and deeper pool of talent, the abilities, the passion, the time, the energy, and the money of a larger pool of Canadians. Without broadening and deepening our talent pool, we can't hope to prosper as a sector. And finally, perhaps least obvious, but I think no less important, is that we have an opportunity as equestrians to project our values into Canada at large. The Canadian Equestrian Team was founded in the 1840s, And it included Black members at a time when Black North Americans were being held as slaves in the United States. And more recently, in the 1950s, it included Indigenous members at a time when the federal government denied Indigenous Canadians the right to vote. There's no denying that Canada has become a better place because of the values embraced and projected by Canadian horse people. I think the question for our generation of Canadian equestrians is whether our best days are behind us or ahead of us. The first matter of demographics that I'll draw your attention to is the question of the age profile of our sector. In this first slide, you can have a sense of at the beginning of this century, there was a demographic bulge in our sector, grouped largely around baby boomers, but it was somewhat out of keeping, not hugely, but somewhat out of keeping with the age demographics of Canadian society at large. 7 years later, in 2010, that bulge had moved forward by another 10 years. And using the best estimates we have for 2021, that bulge has moved further. In other words, we as a sector are aging rapidly. And it's no exaggeration to say that that bulge is about to, in the next few decades, collide with the limit of human lifespan. The older Canadians represent a look back into our past. Of necessity, they are Canadians who were born and grew up in Canada as it existed decades ago. If we are to remedy this demographic bulge and the fact that we're, as a sector, galloping towards the edge of a demographic precipice, we have to find ways of engaging younger Canadians. And younger Canadians are, of course, the most diverse group of Canadians in our country's history. Looking further into the gender and race demographics of our sector, the first graph will surprise no one, and that is that men are underrepresented in our sector by a factor of about 5. Roughly half of Canadians, there's a roughly even split in the population at large between men and women, but only 1/5 of participants in the equine sector are men. The percentage of women rises to 92% if one only looks at people who are involved in licensed competition. For race, the most recent national census suggests that about 22% of Canada's population is made up of racialized Canadians. Only about 4% of equestrians are racialized Canadians. And that these two graphs taken together suggest a fundamentally unsustainable state of affairs for our country. These two graphs should give us a sense of the hard reality of just how unrepresentative our sector is when compared to the population at large. And when one considers this in conjunction with the rapidly aging profile of our population, we get a sense that if we are to sustain ourselves as a sector, if we are to ensure that future generations enjoy equestrianism or have the same opportunities to enjoy equestrianism that we've taken for granted, we have to do something about this. The final aspect I'll raise is the question of bringing in new Canadians into the sector. Canada has not had replacement level fertility since 1971. That means for the past half century, our population has been sustained largely by immigration. Without immigration, our population would have been shrinking since 1971 rather than growing. And by 2031, so in about 9 years, an outright majority of Canadians over 15 will either have been born outside of Canada or have at least one parent who was born outside of Canada. In Toronto, where I was born, already a majority of its residents were born outside of our country. This means that for any sector or any economic or social activity, it's critical for its survival that it find ways to engage with new Canadians. Simultaneously with these changes that have been going on for the past half century for us, we are, as a sector, facing the possibility of a massive die-off. Demographically, the equine sector is dying. And unless we do something to increase the pool from which we draw our participants, we will quite literally die off within another generation. The good news is that the 4 countries that provide the 4 highest percentage of immigrants to our country are also 4 countries that represent some of the largest horse cultures around the world. That means that on the one hand, there's desperate need in the equine sector to reach out to new Canadians. On the other hand, there's a great opportunity to do so. So as we move into the balance of, or the meat and substance of our discussion tonight, there's some questions that I would suggest that you consider in the breakout sessions and in our deliberations. The first is, how can we increase our understanding of who is and who is not part of the equine sector? If you looked at some of the details of the statistics I provided earlier, the equestrian statistics are no more recent than 2010. There has been no national survey of the equestrian sector in 11 years, and the questions that were asked in 2010 are often have very little to do with questions of race and of inclusivity, race, ability, and indigeneity. The second is to try to understand, can we understand, what are the barriers that prevent or discourage people from underrepresented groups from joining our sector, without knowing what is keeping people out, without knowing why we have such unbalanced demographics in our sector. We can't hope to take steps that will remedy them. The third is it possible to reform the sector's governing institutions? I mentioned that I served as head of the National Equestrian Federation. When I was the head, there were roughly 3,000, an estimated 3,000 racialized Canadians who were full members of the Federation. Today, as a result of changes to the membership structure, that number is 0. And that is not a change for the better, in my view. Next, how can we join hands with other institutions and other sectors to try to reshape the public perception of equestrianism? People are only likely to want to join our sector if they feel that our sector reflects them. For many Canadians, that's not the case, and the perception of equestrianism is one that is tied up with elitism and exclusion. To recruit more people and a different range of people, we'll have to find ways to overcome that. How can we ensure that the discussion that we have this evening spreads to the rest of Canada and creates community consensus? In the long term, changing the equine sector will require a consensus, not just amongst institutions, but amongst the community itself. There have to be ways for the conversations that have started, that will start tonight, to take hold across our country. And next, for a sector that is as traditional as ours, one that so tightly embraces its sense of history and its sense of dignity, there must be ways that we can use those qualities as a catalyst for change rather than an obstacle to change. Tradition need not mean a jealous embrace of the past. It can mean an enthusiastic and optimistic embrace for the future by projecting long-held values into the future. I'll slip gingerly through them to say as well, there are questions of how we can ensure that people see themselves in our sector, both literally and figuratively. How can they imagine themselves or someone like themselves being part of the sector? Do they see images of people like themselves in the sector? For Indigenous horsemanship, whose roots go deep back into Canadian history, is there a way for us to ensure that Canadians at large are aware of them? And are there things that we can do as a sector to support Indigenous horsemanship? Are there ways that we can strengthen public understanding of and their support for para-equestrianism and therapeutic riding? And perhaps most difficult of all, are there ways to break down the economic disincentive and the economic barriers to becoming part of the equine sector? These are only some of the questions that we can ponder. We will not have time to get through them all tonight. I think it's important that we think of today as a beginning of the conversation rather than an end. And I wish you well in your deliberations. Before I hand them on, I'll ask, are there any quick questions for me before I hand things back to Simone? Seeing none, I will hand matters back to Simone.
Thank you, Akaash, for introducing us to the topic for this evening and giving us some really helpful information on the demographics of the equine industry in Canada. So next we're going to be moving on to Simone Williams, who is joining us tonight, and she will be expanding on the experiences that her students have shared with her regarding para riding and competition. We would like to thank Simone Williams for joining us this evening and sharing her knowledge and expertise with us. Over the course of her career, she has amassed a lot of valuable knowledge from various levels of competitions in different disciplines, and that has prepared her to speak with us tonight. So I'm just going to switch over to her presentation and then we will begin.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I own a riding stable just east of Ottawa. We have 46 horses, and we have lots of different clients. But over the years, I have ran and helped run a therapeutic riding program for over 10 years. And I've also been assistant coach to our Paralympic team. And my current passion is developing programs and using our facilities and horses to help children of the Children's Aid Society. With these experiences, it's not just the horses. So when people come to the farm, there's all animals. There's dogs and cats, and also they're out in nature. So there are all these amazing experiences that they can have. And what I wanted to share with you this evening is some of the barriers to participating in these activities. We had a therapeutic riding program at our farm that ran for 10 years. It ran 5 days a week, and many, many children went through the program. It was a program that was designed for children that were quite challenged physically and mentally. So some of the children really could just feel the horses. Some of them would lie on the horses and feel the warmth of their bodies. Some of them would have back riders, and then some of them required sidewalkers. One of the challenges with therapeutic riding is it does take a lot of people, and it takes special horses, and it takes different facilities, and that you need a ramp to help the children get on the horses. But what it gave to these children was incredible. So from the moment that the bus arrived, the dog would walk on, his name was George, and he'd go and he'd greet every child, and you just see their faces light up, and they would focus and interact with all the animals. Or sometimes the horses would just, from them breathing on them, it would make them giggle and laugh. And so it was just such a fabulous program. Then at the end of 10 years, it got canceled because of funding for their buses. That year, also their swimming got canceled. And it was so sad because these children didn't have a lot, and it was such a great program for them. But due to funding cuts, it was no longer allowed to continue. So my current passion is helping children who are under the care of our Children's Aid Society in Ottawa. And these are just amazing kids that have had some challenges in their lives. And what the program's designed to do is to give them something to look forward to, something to tell their friends about. And some of these kids come up and they just pat the cats. Some of them come up and they ride. And the confidence and pleasure they get from it, it's really amazing. And so if you're thinking of volunteering, there's lots of opportunities, and it's not a one-way street. Like what you get from helping in these programs is also indescribable. The third area that I have worked with, we were going to talk about some of the barriers to that therapeutic riders and children in care face. So transportation was a big one that we experienced. Lack of programming and facilities. It's hard to find facilities that have the horses, the volunteers, at the ramp. Other problems were discrimination. Some people felt that the children that were part of our program didn't benefit enough, but honestly, they just never spent time working with these children because it was amazing, the reactions that we get from the kids. Sometimes they just start humming songs, and just that's so special. And financial, that always comes into it. These programs are expensive to run, and we can never have too many volunteers. So if you look at the horse in the picture, that's 3 people that are assisting with this young boy who's riding. So it just takes a lot of volunteers. So for the third group, I decided I should go straight to the source and ask them what their experiences were. So para-equestrian riders are different. They are competitive riders through and through. these athletes are classified based on their disabilities from grade 1A, which is quite a lot of challenges, to grade 5, which would be not as many challenges. So grade 1A would be the most impaired. But after they are classified, then doesn't affect the competition. So it affects what movements they would perform. So once they are in the grade 1A, those riders just walk, and they have specific movements they perform, but the competition itself is judged just as normal dressage would be judged. So 3 of the athletes that I asked were Jennifer McKenzie, Jody Ellen Schloss, and Sharon Buffett. I've had the pleasure of coaching Sharon and Jennifer, and they're so inspiring. So their drive to overcome their challenges, also the systematic challenges, it's really impressive. Is there something that we can do to decrease these barriers? So our first athlete, Jennifer McKenzie, she's a grade 3 rider, and here are some of the things that she struggles with, but she's been a very, very successful athlete. So for example, in her test, she'd have trot halt transitions, trot walk, trot transitions, 10-meter circles, medium trot, leg yield, rein back, turn on the haunches, serpentines, stretching walk. And in the freestyle, she's allowed to show canter and counter canter. So this is what Jennifer had to say, that each athlete on a team deserves to be treated equally with respect and develop a cohesive team. Some Canadian venues with large able-bodied classes have difficulty scheduling separate warm-up areas. As a para rider, you can find yourself warming up with Grand Prix riders. As a rider with double vision, that can be most difficult and dangerous. In fairness, there are many high-level riders who are respectful and understand the para-discipline. It's a difficult time as every rider is concentrating on their own performance. However, on a personal note, I have enjoyed my own pursuit of excellence these last years. Fortunately for me, I have enjoyed 20 years of para-equestrian endeavors, and I am aware of the lack of inclusivity often. However, having been a competitive athlete most of my life, I'm able to disregard the issues and concentrate on giving my best. The first years of para were the easiest, as a majority of athletes rode borrowed horses, and it was a more level playing field. As the years progressed, especially in Europe, very expensive, talented horses were on most teams. So it was difficult for Canadian riders to have fair competition. Many riders and horses are sponsored by large companies and wealthy owners. Canada's vast younger country could only afford our top athlete to be sponsored and receive all the best coaching and horses and support. Regional competitions are not really always fair to the disabled rider. So even though they pay FEI fees, management complains about changing the arena. Again, that's maybe where volunteers could help out for the lower grades 1 to 3, because they ride in a smaller ring than the higher grades, and also that the able-bodied competitors ride in. And the other thing is they often slate these classes first thing in the morning or last thing at night. And sometimes without much notice, the disabled athlete is slated into a class where there has been a cancellation, and it may be judged by someone who was not listed. Jody Ellen Schloss. Jody's, she's a grade 1A athlete. So in her test, she does 20-meter circles in the walk, 10-meter circles, and 8-meter circles. She lets her horse stretch. She does halts and serpentines, and she does medium walk. In her freestyle, they are allowed to trot and show lateral work. They don't have to, but they're allowed to. So Jody, she represented Canada at the 2012 Paralympics, 2018 World Equestrian Games, Tokyo 2020, and she's written a book recently called From Anguish to Hope, and she just graduated as a therapeutic recreation therapist. She said that she loves her horses and her sport, so that's what always keeps her going. In para-dressage world, it's expected that able-bodied people have to exercise the horse to keep in shape and ready to compete. I can only ride my competition horse once or twice per week, and I completely understand that, but it sometimes feels like I don't matter. I know that I am essential to making our team work. But her horses are amazing, but that's the biggest barrier that she finds, that she's not included always in that conversation, but that people are talking about what she should and shouldn't do, but that she's not involved in it. She rides her horse Lovin once or twice a week because her coach has to ride him to prepare him for competition. And she can't ride the same days as she does. Perhaps this gets the horse a little bit up, and Jody just rides him in the walk. Because of her disability, she can't trot or canter, and her coach can't ride him in trot or canter before she rides him because she rides him only in the walk. Sharon Buffett. Sharon is a grade 2 rider, and she's written down here some of her successes, including some Paralympics, eligibility to compete in the Paralympics, and she was also ranked 9th in the world as a grade 2 athlete. So in her competition, she's allowed to do walk trot transitions, 20-meter circles in trot, serpentines, showing some lengthening of stride and trot, 8-meter vaults in the walk, and in the freestyle, also some trot lateral work. And remember that once they're classified, their competition is judged just the same as regular competition. Just the classification only affects what movements are required in their tests. And so what she had to say was para-athletes are very diverse in their abilities and barriers. They come across are also just as diverse, depending on location. And so Canada's a big country, so we do have lots of different things that affect different riders across our country. Not all athletes have access to either a therapeutic riding stable to begin riding or coaches who are willing to take on para riders. When looking to ride, para riders and coaches need to be honest and open with each other if they are to be successful in both training and in the competition ring. National competitions are open to holding para classes. However, international competitions are few and far between in this country. Being able to qualify for major games is almost impossible unless you can afford to travel to Florida for the winter and other US internationals. Riders need to be realistic as to their expectation as to how far they wish to go competitively, as the quality of the horse comes at quite a high cost now, and being able to find and afford quality of horse needed to compete internationally is becoming more difficult. So she's the second athlete to mention that cost of finding that high level horse and also of being able to qualify in her own country. I asked her, what does she think people can do to help? And she wrote, that's a tough one in the sense riders need to access quality horses to be able to continue to compete or move up the ranks. Competition organizers are not open to holding CPEDIs due to only a few riders competing and the expense of having extra officials and classifiers. It's difficult for them to even break even. So if people want to help sponsor classes, competitions might be more open to offering internationals so that more riders have the opportunity to qualify. So what are some of your ideas? So what can you do to help? Volunteer, that's a really big one. All these programs need a lot of volunteers. So at therapeutic riding centers, at para competitions, at events, and for fundraisers. And it's not a one-way contribution. You'll get back so much in return. Sponsor a competition. Help to fundraise for an athlete's horse training or competition expenses. At para competitions, be supportive and encouraging. Offer your assistance, especially if those rings need changing. Donate a horse to a para athlete. Join a group that supports these riders and athletes. Organize a program or help to fundraise for one. What ideas do you have? At this time, we're going to break out into groups so everyone can share their thoughts and ideas. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Country FM, KX 94.7.
Welcome back. We hope that was an enjoyable and eye-opening discussion with fellow equine enthusiasts. A summary of the solutions suggested from all the breakout rooms will be presented to you by Akaash Maharaj at the end of the evening. In the meantime, we are now going to hear Linda Greening and Lorna Cameron. They are connecting with us from the UK and are here to discuss opportunities regarding inclusivity and diversity at Harper University. Linda and Lorna are both senior lecturers at the university in the equine department. Linda is the head of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee as a part of the International Society of Applied Ethology. Lorna is heavily involved in the university's outreach program, which supports underrepresented students seeking higher education in the equine sector.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lauren. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me just 1 second. So thank you so much to Katrina and the organising committee to invite Lorna and I to talk to you today about equality in the Equestrianism, specifically looking at the UK and thinking about what higher education institutions are doing to address that. And I'm grateful to Lauren for taking us through the introduction to myself and Lorna. That's saved us a few minutes there. So just to provide you with an overview, we're going to set the scene and talk about regulation and legislation in the UK super briefly, just to contextualise our work. Talk a little bit about the equine industry, what we know, look at the perceived and real barriers to representation and participation, and then talk about some of the action that's being taken to address that. And I thought just to start with, in case there was any terminology that comes up, there's a brief glossary here just to talk about allyship, recognising that there are certain privileges that different groups hold, and being able to use your privilege alongside oppressed voices is a mighty powerful thing to do. It may be from time to time that I refer to the acronym BAME, which is BAME, and as you can see stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Communities. It's a common acronym that's used in the UK, but also recognised as massively disruptive. So the Commission for Race and Ethnic Discrimination Disparities has recommended just this year to the UK government to reduce the use of this. It's used as a categorisation for key performance indicators and all kinds, all over the place. And it detracts from the true message of some of the literature that it appears in. We're also going to just briefly think about the difference between equality and equity, and bear in mind that much as we are talking about ethnicity, specifically diverse ethnicity, there are intersections of characteristics that underlie and interplay with these. So here we go. One of my favourite things is to display this picture at my institution. I should come up with a horse-related one. It would help contextualise some things maybe better, but it also helps visualise what we're talking about with terminology. So on the left-hand side, you can see equity. We talk about it relative to access and opportunity. So all students at our institution have access to learning support resources. And if we think about it, relative to the equine industry, then we can think that there are a number of riding schools across the UK which people have access to, both in urban and rural settings, to facilitate access to horses. But we recognise that even though there's equal opportunity there are hidden barriers as to how these people are accessing those opportunities. And so we move into the middle picture of equity, thinking about the additional resources that are required to ensure that people can access the opportunities that have been made equally accessible to them. So equitable access might involve subsidised lessons. It might involve outreach into the community, addressing the culture of equestrianism to ensure that it's accepting. And then on the right-hand side there, we have inclusivity, which is where we think, well, why is there a barrier there in the first place? Why do we need a big wooden fence? Let's just replace it so that everybody can see, and we don't need to do anything to ensure equity or equality is required. So equine-orientated degree study experiences similar issues as the equine industry relative to access, awareness, etc. One of the major questions, I guess, that's often asked is why should we care about equality, equity, and inclusivity? So I'm going to briefly introduce the why, other than, of course, our ethical responsibility to other human beings, why we champion diversity in the equine industry, in higher education and beyond in the UK. So just briefly, UK legislation in 2010, the Equality Act came in. The United Kingdom is different to Great Britain, and England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales are all different countries with cultural diversity of their own, but we're all bound by UK law relative to equality. We tend to be quite UK-centric in our thinking, so it's important that we're reminded that not everyone is the same or has the same needs, and legislation ensures that these 9 protected characteristics have equal opportunity and equity in relation to progression, pay, and no prejudice within the workplace. And within higher education, there's also legislation. So all universities registered with the Office for Students, so legally recognised as a university, they must produce what's known as an access and participation plan. And that provides information about gaps in access, success, continuation and progression for minority students at that institution, and sets out how the institution plans to use a proportion of the income from tuition fees to put in place measures that ensure parity of experience and parity of outcome for all groups within the institution. And the Office for Students asks us to target specifically students that disclose a disability, students from ethnically diverse backgrounds, mature students, those with previous experience of local authority care or estrangement, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. This recognises that I should highlight that this does not include non-UK domiciled students, and obviously there are 9 protected characteristics, and these target groups only maybe reach across to a small proportion of those. So highlighting how maybe exclusive access and participation is, even though it's trying to be inclusive, but it's better to have something than nothing. And currently the majority of universities that offer land-based degrees, so that's equine orientated, animal, agriculture, veterinary nursing, etc. They report on average 96% of their student population are white. And so those institutions have been tasked with looking at how they can improve access to their degrees for those from ethnically diverse communities. And the Office for Students has been really good in that they provided higher education institutions with data on student access, success and progression. And it helps us to identify where those gaps between minority groups and mainstream students exist. And they report this data annually to the public. So we have a responsibility and a commitment through legislation, but also through our duty to the public and to serve those in terms of our civic duty. And it's our job as a university to close the gaps, and that requires us to investigate where underlying inequalities are influential. And the Office for Students has been fantastic in promoting positive action, because a number of people feel bound by issues around positive discrimination. And I think in the UK, in the history of the UK, there's been a number of examples of where positive discrimination has really upset the apple cart in terms of the drive for inclusivity. So positive action is all about recognising where levelling up is required and taking steps to ensure that that occurs. So, for example, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, if we see reduced access for those students, then we will target schools and colleges in those areas and offer aspiration and awareness raising activities, which we call outreach, to encourage them to think about land-based opportunities and or higher education if they hadn't previously, specifically those that are showing potential to study at that particular level. So that gives you some background, hopefully, around legislation and what happens in higher education. Within the equine industry then, so I'm just going to run through some pictures here really quickly. This is our Olympic team, the eventing Olympic team that went to Tokyo this year. This is our Great British show jumping Olympic team that went to Tokyo this year, and this is our Great British dressage Olympic team. And talking to the British Equestrian Federation, they are committed to exploring opportunities for progression of riders from ethnically diverse backgrounds, so that in the future we will see a more diverse representation on podiums in the future. But we recognise that there is a pipeline involved there. And in order to facilitate that pipeline, they've recognised that there needs to be better representation within industry. So if you Google search British riding, then you get this stereotyped image that comes up that is not representative of diversity within our equine industry. So, for example, we have here Lydia Hayward, who rides in the UK but represents Jamaica as an eventer. And then we have Khadija Mella, who was the first hijab-wearing jockey in a competitive British horse race, and she won the Magnolia Cup on her Mount there Haviland back in just a couple of years ago. So representation, real models within industry, massively important. And when we go into the equine industry, we recognise that there are a number of challenges. So, for example, culturally, where there's no family history in equine and a lack of knowledge about infrastructure, demographically, many BAME families live in inner city areas where equine facilities may not be accessible, and actually going out into a rural setting can be a barrier in itself because of unfamiliarity with what rural environments require. We might also talk about socioeconomics, so the cost of sports in relation to family incomes in inner cities, which can be challenging for families. We talked about urban participation in my breakout room. Accessibility of infrastructure, so we talked about progression, thinking about regional progression opportunities and facilities. There's a lack of education, there's financial constraints around the cost of riding in general, and then a lack of role models that can affect how people feel about riding. And then, of course, there is media bias, a lack of representation of ethnic diversity in fashion models in equine catalogues and advertisements and media coverage. But there is a lot of positive action that's happening within the industry. So the British Equestrian Federation is moving very quickly on this. They've set up the Equi Youth programme, which is about urban riding centres and encouraging rider development there, and also facilitating coach development. This year, the National Equine Forum, this year, the National Equine Forum hosted speakers from diverse ethnicities for the first time in its history to talk about inclusivity. British racing has been doing an awful lot, as we can talk about Amila Aswat from St James's City Farm, who has joined the Riding a Dream Academy and funded by the Jockey Club to become a jockey of the future. The British Equine Trade Association has consulted recently to try and include demographic questions within their 5-yearly survey, so we can finally profile the equine industry. We don't have any ideas around our demographics per se. The BAME Equine and Rural Pursuits Focus Group was established on Facebook, which I'll talk about in just a little bit more in just a minute. They have proposed the BAME Equestrian and Rural Activity Centre of Excellence, which is striving to overcome the challenges mentioned previously and bridge the gap between participation at introductory grassroots level to competition and professional career level. And they've also collaborated with a number of land-based institutions in an outreach project that is aiming at community groups. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit more detail in a second too. But just to quickly talk about BERF, so the BAME Equine and Rural Activities Focus Groups. Sandra Murphy is a Black female entrepreneur who experienced racism herself within the equine industry during her illustrious career in the equine industry. So she set up BERF in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder to provide a safe space for BAME equestrians. They have close to 350 members now, and Hartpury University has partnered with BERF. So I'm the education liaison officer, and I oversee that collaborative outreach project, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in just a minute as well. But the group welcomes positive suggestions, ideas, strategies, funding initiatives that may help to engage, enthuse, promote and support members of the BAME community to participate in a wide range of rural activities. The members themselves have come forward with some of the examples of implicit and explicit racism that they've experienced in the UK equine industry. Some of it is direct abuse, some of it throwaway comments, and all of them are unacceptable. And as we've talked about culturally, that level of acceptance within our industry is massively important to support progression of diverse characteristics coming through and being successful. So here we have the block project, which is the BERF Landex Outreach Collaborative Project. Effectively, a number of land-based universities in the UK looking at barriers to accessing land-based degree or educational opportunities. So this group is consulting widely to understand the needs of their BAME community groups in their regional areas. And they're exploring and establishing relationships with those groups so that they can offer bespoke outreach activities for those communities to come onto campus and also to take off campus and go to community groups. So they're developing a framework of activities. They're starting to think about developing a central point of information. And we're looking at how we might be able to evaluate this as we move forwards. But I'm going to hand over to Lorna Cameron in just a minute, who's going to talk about the work that Hartpury University has completed recently with our partnership with St James's City Farm. So that's our city farm in the centre of Gloucester. And the historical relationship with between St James and Hartpury is we sponsor the farm annually. We offer placements for students, or they offer us placements for students, which is fantastic for them in terms of increasing their volunteer pool. We run outreach activity for City Farm members, and we engage in knowledge exchange. So we offer them student and staff expertise, and we benefit from that by raising awareness and reputation of Hartpury within the community, thinking about those significant voices that we need to influence. So Lorna, can I pass over to you to talk about Hartpury Outreach in Action?
Yes, thank you very much, Linda. That'd be great. So thank you very much, everybody. One of my duties this year is to be Equine Outreach Coordinator, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. But there's just some points I wanted to bring together. And I think the kind of recommendations that I think are really important is that Hartpury and many other colleges and universities in the UK's commitment to outreach has to be real, and my duties as an outreach coordinator are included into my timetabled workload. So it's part of my work balance that those hours are accounted for. So for example, this week I've got 3 hours that I'm doing on Thursday with a school group from an underrepresented school socioeconomic group, and that's in the lab, for example. And so that's taken into account within my workload, which is really helpful. And also the organisation, especially Hartpury, there's clear support and organisation. So I can turn to Linda, who's the head of Inclusivity and Diversity, and there's members of the marketing team who are specifically dedicated to outreach organisations, and there's dedicated team members in there, even to the point that we even have now our own dedicated outreach student ambassador, which was something that actually came from a visit that we did from St James City Farm to us, where one of the ambassadors did such a fantastic job and they were so engaged in what they were doing. So it brought really good experience to the student as well, that they've now become our dedicated outreach student ambassador. So they have that as part of their role as well. So it gives access to school children, college students, and to the St James City Farm community. It gives them access to Hartpury facilities, which is great. For example, they don't have horses that are quite as big as ours, for example, so we can actually allow some of their students and participants to be riding a little bit longer. And the key thing is to try and keep up the momentum of that engagement and that interaction. And that's something that Linda and I work very hard on, to think about what's next, what are we going to be doing next, and what can our students get from these interactions, as well as what can the communities that we're reaching out to get. So next slide, please, Linda. Thank you very much. So this is us having a super fun day, and I chose these two pictures because I wanted to show you what we get out of the outreach activity as an equestrian college, but also myself personally. So this was a visit from St James City Farm, where we had a group of young people who had never really had any interaction with horses. And we also had their bus driver as well. And in the end, by the end of the day, they were all patting the horses. They had all had a look round the yard. I think you might see me there doing something inappropriate with that horse. And then we also got all of the students plus the driver of the bus, who'd never been near a horse in his life before, onto Margaret, who is our Raceway event simulator. And they all just grew in confidence being able to ride a horse. Okay, it wasn't a real horse this time, but it actually gave them the confidence to see themselves in that position and be able to maybe imagine that they could get involved in that sport. And I think I can speak for Linda as well to say that I think we all had a great day that day, and it's an activity we'll be repeating many times in the future. Really, I suppose it helped that the sun was shining and it was a beautiful day as well. So I'll hand back to Linda to finish us off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorna. And I think that's a great place to finish in terms of the positive impact that outreach can have, hopefully, on everybody that's involved. There's some points here at the end around genuine inclusion that our kind of consultative higher education body has come up with, but I'll skip over those and just finish with allyship, thinking about which one you are, how you can help promote and provide access and speak up for marginalised voices within our industry to ensure equal opportunities, equity of experience, and obviously increased participation in industry to maintain that and sustain it going forwards. So I think that's hopefully us the time. I should say thank you very much for listening. And maybe there's some time for questions now, but if not, then I'm happy to pick those up at the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda and Lorna. Now Akaash is going to wrap up the very important topics we discussed tonight in our breakout rooms.
Thank you, Lorna. I'm going to do my best to try to distill down the conclusions that were drawn from the discussion groups. I'm going to hazard a guess that we're going to be putting together a more extensive document that will accept notes from each of those sessions, but I'll give you the highlights now. So broadly speaking, on issues of disabilities, several groups noted that there are facilities that are not able to accommodate riders with disabilities or may not know what they need to do to accommodate riders with disabilities. And that sense of fear and uncertainty may hold them back. As a result, perhaps there could be an expansion of safety courses and facility education about what they need to do so that they are more welcoming to people with riders with disabilities, and it may be more modest than they fear. There's also questions or observations that there are many riders who want to be helpful to and want to be welcoming to riders with disability, but feel shy or fretful about their offer of help being perceived as condescending. And perhaps a response to that could be having riders with disabilities, especially riders who are at the more senior levels of our sport, making it possible for them to speak to facilities and equestrians across the province and across the country, so that people get a better sense of what they don't know and what are the social norms. There's also the point that volunteering is a key aspect to riding for the disabled and para-equestrian competition. Perhaps there isn't an adequate understanding of what volunteer tasks people could put themselves forward for so that they can consider doing that. So that is, again, a question of sectoral education. One group spoke about the lack of organizations and groups that are advocating for para-athletes. And perhaps some elements of this could be organizations or initiatives by existing organizations to reshape the public perception of the value of para-athletes as being first and foremost athletes, to help in raising funds, to help in making the case to potential sponsors, and in helping to package and make generally known funding opportunities that might already exist. On the broad heading of racial and ethnic inclusion, observations that there's a need for facilities that have been successful and individuals who have been successful in coming into the horse sector to more fervently trumpet those stories, either as the institutions themselves or in partnership with larger associations, to hold up examples of success so people feel that success is possible, and to hold up the example of people who have achieved, so that other people from those communities recognize that it's possible for them to be successful in the sector. The possibility of producing a list of things that different kinds of facilities and associations can do to bring in more people from traditionally underrepresented groups, observations about not enough regulations for equal pay in our sector, and not enough time in overstretched schedules. There was the suggestion that equine businesses be encouraged to have programs to recruit and catalyze participation by people from underrepresented groups. So I suppose there would be the sense of the community coming up with potential ideas and programs, promoting them, and encouraging its organizations and businesses to adopt them, perhaps with some sort of reward for them, like heightened profile or praise in the sector. Not enough schoolmasters for new riders, and especially children, and something that links to urban participants. We heard several groups talk about the difficulty of finding transportation from urban centres to rural barns and the paucity of riding facilities in urban centres. A potential response to this might be encouraging systems of carpooling, perhaps systems for different facilities to pool their efforts in busing, and so that more people who don't have access to private transportation would be able to get out to rural barns. More broadly on urban participation, a sense of the need to combat bullying in the sector, especially bullying that is based on the idea that a successful participant or a successful equestrian or a laudable equestrian is someone who can afford an expensive horse or fashionable clothing. Instead, that organizations and institutions should frame their story and project a sense of what a successful rider is as someone who is able to build up his or her skills and bring his or her horse along. There were observations about the need to keep, I'll call it a database or an accessible database of institutions, facilities that provide horses, that provide instruction, and that provide equipment, which might not be obvious to someone who is not already in the sector. And finally, for people who might find it especially difficult to, or come from communities where it is especially difficult to afford even the minimum threshold to become involved in riding, perhaps there could be options to encourage large facilities and prominent horse people to specifically recruit exercise riders from underrepresented groups to give them entree into the sector. I'm sure that there are other things I've not covered here. We will, as I say, try to summarize them in the documents that will come out of this session and make them available to all participants.
Thank you, Akaash, for summarizing all of those breakout rooms. I'm sure there was a lot of important discussion that went on, and unfortunately we are a little bit short on time, so we won't be able to discuss some of those important points as much as we maybe would have liked. But at this point, Akaash, myself and my peers would like to thank you for your commitment this year and for all of your insight that you have brought to the discussion tonight. And then we're just going to move on. At this point, our session is coming to a close. So we'd like all of the participants to take a moment. There will be another poll that will launch on your screen, and it will give you the opportunity to vote for the charity you would like to support. So the proportion of votes for each charity is going to be transitioned into a dollar amount that will be donated to support each of the charities. And all 10 are listed on the poll, so you may just have to scroll down to find the one that you would like. And this poll is being shared all 3 nights. So following the conclusion of tomorrow's session, all of the votes from all 3 nights will be compiled together, and those final results will be shared on our Facebook and Instagram, so that all of you can be aware of what charities are being supported from your efforts tonight. So I think at this point, most of you have had the chance to make your decision. So we're going to end the poll. And then, as I mentioned, the results will be shared on our social media following tomorrow's session. So just as we're concluding, we would like to again thank our organizing committee for all of their efforts this year, as well as all of the other groups that support us, including Ontario Equestrian, Equestrian Canada, and Equine Guelph, as well as the university, obviously, for allowing us to put on this event. And we would also like to thank our speakers, obviously, for donating their time tonight and for sharing all of their valuable insight with us this evening. And I hope that you all gained something from the experience that our speakers were able to share with us tonight. And then finally, we would like to recognize once more our official media sponsor, which is KX 94.7.
We would also like to invite you to join us again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for a lively discussion of career paths in the equine industry. The session will be held virtually using the same Zoom link as tonight, plus you as the audience will be able to interact with the panelists in the Q&A portion of the evening. On the topic of careers, we would also like to bring to your attention to the Equine Job Track website run by Equine Guelph, which serves a platform for job search and hiring within the equine industry. Thank you all for joining us this evening and contributing to the important discourse on inclusivity in the equine industry. We look forward to hearing your feedback on our session, which can be submitted through the link posted in the chat. The feedback survey will only take a few minutes of your time and will allow us to reflect on the success of our session. Thanks again for joining us and have a lovely evening.